Does self-doubt ever undermine your approach to decision making and problem solving? If so, you are not alone. When we're new to something or we're comparing ourselves to others, we tend to second guess ourselves, which makes it harder to think clearly and make rational choices. This week, I talked with Tommy Ogden, co-founder of Activera Consulting, about his career journey, including the twists and turns along the way. We also talk about the importance of trying new things to figure out what you want to do, failing quickly, and moderating your expectations when you're learning something new. And finally, Tommy shares practical frameworks you can use to make more confident decisions and temper your imposter syndrome. Thank you so much, as always, for listening. Welcome to the Impostor Syndrome Files. My name is Kim Meninger, and as an executive coach and former high-tech leader, my personal mission is to help professionals overcome imposter syndrome so that you can advance your career with confidence. Each week, I interview a new guest who brings a powerful perspective to this conversation, including personal stories, best practices, and new insights. The more we talk about this issue, the more we destigmatize imposter syndrome, recognize that we're not alone, and empower ourselves to access the tools and resources that can help us and those around us. Thank you so much for listening and for sharing with others you think would benefit from this conversation. Welcome, Tommy. I am very excited for our conversation today, and I would love to start by inviting you to introduce yourself.
Perfect, Kim. Thank you so much for having me on. My name is Tommy Ogden. I am currently a director and co-founder at Activera Consulting, where I lead our agility and analytics practice. And Activera is just about a year old, a year, maybe 2 weeks ago, as of recording of this episode. Prior to Activera, I was with Accenture for 4 years. And prior to Accenture, I was with a small boutique management consulting firm, very similar to Activera, for 6 years prior to that. And then I was at business school, and then I did a lot of odd jobs, and we can get into the history, as I'm sure we will in this discussion, but that's about me in a nutshell.
Yeah, and thank you. I really appreciate that, and I would love to get into some of that. I think
Sure.
career paths in and of themselves are always interesting, but they also come with a lot of trepidation and, I think that they are exciting and daunting at the same time. So I'd love to hear a little bit about the path you've taken and what were some of the considerations along the way, any fears or doubts that you experienced?
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we're here to talk imposter syndrome, and it's certainly something I felt at multiple junctions in my career. So I'll start back to where I would say the initial imposter syndrome started from a business perspective, and that was with my choice of major in college. So a lot of times I'm in IT advisory for oil and gas, so I get a lot of engineers, get a lot of business majors. Well, I decided to major in Spanish in college, and I did a study abroad program. And I focused on Spanish, but I took Portuguese and I took French, and I really liked languages generally. But to be honest, I didn't have much of a conception of what my future career would be. I just knew that I liked languages and I was following my passion. And so that put me in an interesting spot once I graduated, which is, what do you do with a Spanish major, right? I mean, I could maybe become a teacher, maybe I could go into the UN, work for the State Department, maybe be a translator, perhaps. But to be honest, none of those career paths really struck me as something that I'd want to do long term. And so I sort of put myself in an odd spot right after graduation, because I decided to follow my passions. Now, it did end up working out in the end, but I would say that was the sort of first pass that I had internally of, hey, maybe my degree isn't as valuable as an engineering degree or as a business degree. And again, I don't think it ended up that way, but that was sort of the way that I was feeling about it at the time.
Yeah, and I think that's a really common experience because, I mean, I can just share from my own personal experience. I studied psychology always with the intention of becoming a psychologist. But when I found myself in high tech, surrounded by all these business majors and engineering majors, and I thought, who am I to be with all of these people, right? And so I think that issue that you're describing is one that I think is really important and also really unfortunate. How many people go into college thinking I have to do the the practical thing, or I have to be responsible, as opposed to thinking, what will I enjoy doing? What interests me? And then figure out how to translate that into the world. Because I think that the business world and the world more broadly benefits from the diversity of expertise that people have. But when it's our own experience, it's so easy to compare ourselves to others and think, well, they did it right and I did it wrong. Right?
Right. Yeah, absolutely. And you hear that nowadays. I've heard it consistently that we value diversity of thought, diversity of background, diversity of education, right? Because those different perspectives that you have on a problem, if you can get a team together that has a disparate view, then you end up coming to a better solution as a whole. And so I think the culture has shifted a little bit to where that diversity is more valued than maybe at least when I graduated college. But it is important and difficult to keep that in the back of your mind, right? When it applies to you. But I think, recognizing and realizing your value is something you should always, continue to strive for. But that was not my case. When I graduated college, I didn't know what I wanted to do. So I essentially took a series of odd jobs, right? I kind of started off in a financial path. I got my Series 65 license to become an investment advisor representative, which allowed me to sell mutual funds. I worked for a company for a year or two trying to do that. I even went back to a continuing education program to get my certified financial planner license, and that was a year-long program, and I quit after 6 months because I just realized that wasn't for me either, right? I was probing and prodding in different directions to try to understand what I wanted to do. And so after that, it was a series of part-time jobs before I finally landed in a financial analyst position at it was called Goodman Manufacturing. I think the brand still exists, but it was bought out by a Japanese company. But they did heating. They created heating and air conditioning. They were a manufacturer, right? So I worked in their financial department for 3 years. And at that point, I met my wife, and it really sort of forced me to evaluate my longer term plans as opposed to, this and that and the other thing and the part-time stuff. And at that point I just realized, hey, I think I'm going to have to go back and get some additional education if I do want to continue in the business world, right? Maybe I need a little bit more training in that regard. And so I did end up going back to business school.
I did the same thing. I found after being in the workplace, I think I was in my high tech career for about 5 years when I finally decided, you know what, I think a business school would be good to just fill in some of the blanks, because I had never taken a business course of any kind while I was
Sure.
in
Neither
college.
had I. Neither had I. Yeah.
Yeah. And so I think it is helpful. And as I think about your career path, I can imagine, and I don't want to put words in your mouth, but I can imagine in the moment it feeling frustrating at certain points, like you're halfway into this certified financial planner course and you drop out of it. But I also feel like that's how we come to find out what we want, and we beat ourselves up when we don't find it perfectly, or we don't, we once again compare ourselves to others. But you just don't know what you don't know. And I was talking to some friends earlier today and who have graduating seniors who are still trying to figure out what they want to do. And I'm like, how would you know? I mean, we have these very generic profiles of what jobs look like out in the world, but unless you have test driven some of them, you're not going to know whether they're for you or not.
Right. Absolutely. And we were talking about that cultural shift, perhaps, into more of a recognition of diversity. Well, I also think that there's more cultural acceptance towards failure, like failure, this whole concept of like iterating and failing fast and learning and then moving forward, and that it's actually a good thing to fail because of the things that you were just describing. It's like you've taken it for a test drive, or you've proven out that, hey, that doesn't work. And that's valuable information to have, especially if it's something that you're going to commit to for a career, right? I mean, this makes a difference in your life, right?
Yeah.
So you don't want to just be one of those punch in, punch out kind of folks who hate their lives, right? It's better to fail and spend 6 months figuring out that's not for you and then moving forward. But you're right, it can feel a bit demoralizing internally. So it's hard, but also good to keep that in mind for sure.
Yeah, I think a lot of it comes down in my mind to what your definition of success is,
Hmm. Hmm.
because I couldn't agree with you more. I unfortunately have talked to a lot of people who have stayed in the same career for 30 years because they didn't want to fail or quit,
Sure.
and have, now at this point feel like I wish I could go back in time and make different decisions. And so it really all comes back to how you think about your relationship to work. And there's always room for change.
For sure. Always room. And you should be a lifelong learner, right?
Mhm.
And let me tell you, just me going back to business school, just to continue on the path here, that did not stop my imposter syndrome. If anything, it actually made it worse to a certain degree. So let me describe that a little bit for you. I went back to business school. I ended up doing a dual degree program. So I'm from Houston, Texas originally. So I went to the University of Houston full-time program for a year and a half, right? Because I was a total career switcher, right? I mean, some people are engineers and they go back to get their business degree and then they just kind of continue on and become, management of engineers, right? But they kind of stay in that path. With me, I knew I didn't want to do the financial analyst stuff anymore. And so I was coming in just, hey, I'm open to learning what my new thing is. So I did that for a year and a half, but the second degree was actually at Thunderbird, which is it's an international business school, and I got a master's in global management. And in order to graduate from that, you actually have to pass a language test. And
Ah,
so here comes my Spanish, right, sort of roaring back from behind my past. But it actually worked out, and I went to Arizona for a year to do that second master degree. I ended up getting to go to back to South America for a business trip as part of that, and it really sort of allowed me to merge my new current passion, which is consulting and business, with my older passion of Spanish and sort of bring those two worlds together. And I think, and people ask me for advice a lot of times about, especially business students, because I typically go back and I do mentorship and other things with the schools. And my suggestion to them is try to do that, right? You majored in something in undergraduate, right? Something that you likely had a passion about. Why wouldn't you try to bridge that gap with the new things that you're learning and ensure that you're bringing both of those to bear so that you can be even more niche than somebody else because you've got both of those backgrounds, right? And so that's trying to take a look at your background and how you can incorporate multiple passions of yours into a single stream. I think is good advice.
I could not agree more. I think that is such a great. I mean, I love that it worked for you, but you're connecting the dots in hindsight rather than connecting
Right.
them
Oh yeah.
proactively, right? But I think that's also a differentiator. And I always joke that we all want to feel special, but we don't want to feel different, right? And
Mm-hmm,
so
hmm. Yeah.
I think for a lot of people, there's almost this secretiveness that we keep about those things that we studied in college that don't necessarily apply to where we are now, as opposed to embracing that as, hey, this actually makes me unique. And I bring a different perspective, as you were saying, with when it comes to diversity of thought. Like you probably didn't know, let's say you didn't know when you were studying Spanish, that you were going to end up, it's going to come full circle at some point, right? But how wonderful that it did, and that you didn't have to just leave that behind you.
Right. Absolutely. And I think you're right about the hindsight comment, right? It's challenging to do it in the moment and say, I'm doing this because I enjoy it and I like it and I'm following my passion. How is this going to benefit me in the future? You don't ever know, right? Sometimes it's impossible to do it to make those connection points until you're, looking in hindsight. But I think that there's some validity to following those passions because if you aren't passionate about something, then you're not going to be as good at it as somebody else who is passionate, I would say, because you're not going to put in the extra hours, you're not going to put in the time and the effort, and that makes a difference. I was talking to my wife the other day, and I can't remember where the quote came from or where I heard it, but it was like the top 1% of every profession is successful. Like
Mhm.
you could the most successful top 1% of pool cleaners they probably make more money than I do, right? Because they're
Mhm.
cleaning the pools of the stars, or they're doing cool like waterfalls and creating, like the pools of the future or something, because they're super passionate about it, right? And
Yeah.
so I think there's something to be said for that. And if you have a passion about that and you can move forward in your career with that drive and with that fire because you are so passionate about it, you're going to be better off, regardless of what that path is.
Yes, you're absolutely right. And I think about that a lot too, is that sometimes high achievers are very motivated to find the one right way to do something, right? Like we want the definitive textbook for how to do something as opposed to thinking, hey, maybe I can do it my own way.
Right. Yeah, yeah, you're absolutely right. Yeah. Or else, okay, so let's continuing on with the timeline here. I went to business school. All right. This is actually where I would say my imposter syndrome creeped in the most out of my entire career. I said there's multiple inflection points. So the first one was sort of graduation and what am I going to do, right, with my Spanish major. Well, this one was a little different. So I'm about to graduate from business school. I got a job as a consultant, right? That was when I said I was a career switcher. Well, I went all in on consulting. So I didn't know about the Accentures of the world and the McKinseys and the Bains and all the different consulting groups that you could potentially join until I went to business school. But as soon as I found out that that was a career path and that you could, go in and work with teams of people to try to solve interesting problems, and that was it for me. And so I focused everything in my business career on consulting certificates and doing consulting jobs out in the community and figuring all that out. But that also led to sort of my greatest fear, which is upon graduation, I'm getting hired by this consulting firm. I'm going to roll onto a client site on Monday morning, right, for a new engagement, and they're going to come to me with a problem, and I'm just gonna like deer in headlights it, right? And I'm paralyzed because I've got all this knowledge supposedly from business school, but have I really applied it effectively, or can I apply it into the real world? And is that even something that I can do? And that kind of imposter syndrome of, hey, now I'm a freshly minted MBA student, right? And now I supposedly can provide all of this value. Well, that's not how I felt internally about it. I was stricken with fear that I wouldn't be able to provide that value that is associated with this newfound degree. And so I think other people could likely relate to that feeling.
Absolutely. So, can I ask you a question about that too? Because nobody was born a seasoned consultant, right? Everybody
Sure.
had their first engagement at some point. So, how did your management team support you on that? Like, did you feel pressured to go into that knowing everything and being perfectly prepared? Or was there some acknowledgement that this was still a learning experience for you?
Right. Yeah, yeah. No, that's a good point. And I think that's the disparate nature of reality versus kind of your own internal monologue.
Yes.
Because no, I wasn't just thrown into the deep end right on day one. I mean, there was a lot of support. They typically won't put new consultants on to an engagement by themselves, right?
Mm.
Typically, there's a manager or a senior manager who's sort of managing the client relationship, and you're working with them on a team to try to, solve a specific problem, doing research or slide work or whatever it may be. So no, no, I mean, people aren't just going to throw you into the shark infested waters and watch you drown. They will provide that support. And I've been lucky in that I've had sort of the full spectrum of experience across consulting now that I'm later in my career. I started with a boutique firm, and then I went to literally the largest consulting firm in the world. I think the last number I saw was 743,000 people at
Oh.
Accenture. And then now I've started my own company or co-founded it with a group of folks. And so I've seen from the entrepreneurial side to the huge bureaucracy of big corporation, and then a smaller like 100-person firm, let's say. And in each one of those cases, it's what you describe, right? I mean, they don't expect you to come in as a newly graduated, individual or a newly minted MBA student and just immediately, throw you off by yourself and give you no support. There's a lot of training and there's a lot of onboarding and a lot of help, but you don't know that coming into it necessarily, and you're sort of worried about it. Yeah, so that was an interesting time.
I can imagine. And I'm glad that you shared that, because I do think it's important to challenge our inner monologue. And when we find ourselves putting that kind of pressure on ourselves, to say, where's this pressure actually coming from? Right. As opposed to just believing what what the voice is telling us, because we are the only ones who expect ourselves to be perfect on day one. And I think when you're new to something, you have this perfect window of opportunity to just acknowledge that you're new. And I call it playing the new card, right? To be able to say, hey, well, since this is my first experience, what should I know? How should I ask you questions? Right. And you just own it, as opposed to pretending that you already know things and then get to a point where you feel like, now I really can't ask because I've been here too long.
Yeah, right. Can't play that card anymore.
Yeah.
That's very true. And I think that helps you not only coming into, I mean, if we're talking about consulting, into a consulting firm, but even at a client site, right? They don't expect you to know everything either, right?
Mhm.
And in fact, it's suggested that once you land on a client engagement, that you do a heavy portion of active listening and question asking up front to ensure that you've got the right context, right? You know who the right stakeholders are that you're going to need to engage and communicate to effectively. And so you don't want to just jump in and say, I know the answer, right? I've got all the solutions, because it's going to be different regardless of or it's going to be different because the client side is different, right? So I think that's important.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, you don't want to come in as a know-it-all. You're not going to build trust that.
Yeah. And that gives consultants a bad rap anyway, right? But yeah, so one of the things that came to my mind when I was in business school and I was struggling or jostling with this idea of, hey, I'm about to get thrown into the deep end. Um, an idea came to me, which is it's sort of like a subscription box. Have you heard of that business model where there's like I think there's one called Butcher Box, for example,
Oh yeah.
that you subscribe to, and then every month you get new meat, like different cuts of meat, and they have subscription boxes for everything, right? There's like a potpourri box, or there's a tea box, right? And they come with new different teas every month, and so when I was in business school, I actually had this idea because I was struggling with this concept of not having tools at the ready to solve these client problems. That it would be really cool if there was a like a business school box, right, where you've got this monthly subscription that comes in with new tool sets or new frameworks or new case studies or new ways of applying innovative sort of cutting edge techniques to solving problems, so that you've got this this tool belt that you can go into the working world with, and it would be targeted towards business students. Now, sounds like a good idea. I thought it was at the time, but I didn't have the capital or the wherewithal to do something like that. But that concept or that idea has never left me, right? I still think that something like that is valuable. And I'm not about to start it myself. So feel free to take the idea and run if you think it's viable. But but the aspect of having a tool set, right, or some sort of inventory of knowledge from which you can pull internally to help you solve different problems, I think can help you overcome some of that imposter syndrome as well, because you're then not reinventing the wheel, right? You're not starting from scratch every single time. You've got some logical way of structuring an approach to a problem, and just getting that understanding and moving in that direction can really help overcome some of those internal inadequacies or issues that you're feeling, right? And so over the course of my now 13, 14-year long consulting career, I've used those frameworks in order to help get get over that hump, right? Especially initially when I'm first looking at a problem. And I'm happy to share with you like some of the frameworks that I use if it would help.
Yeah, can you give us an example? I think I would love to hear one.
Sure. So there's a couple different ones, and a lot of times, in business school, you'll learn SWOT, right? I think everyone's heard of a SWOT analysis. It stands for strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats, right? And you can come in and you can look at all those four, different variables and come to some conclusion, let's say. But the problem with a single framework like that is you can't apply it to every single situation, right? It wouldn't make sense. Like, I'm just going to SWOT this and I'm going to do a SWOT analysis on that. And over here, it doesn't make sense. And what I think people aren't aware of is there are myriad frameworks out there for all sorts of different types of problems. And some of them sound much more daunting than perhaps they are. There's one in particular that I really like, that the technical name is a transformation map. But what I like to call it is the from here to there framework. So anytime you are at a place, a current state, and you want to get to a future state, right? And you've got this gap in between that current state and the future state, and you don't know how to get to that future state, you can use a transformation map to identify the time period. So how long do you want it to get from current state to future state? You can identify the different themes on how to get there. So do I need to enhance my process? Is that a theme? Do I need to change some people's minds? Maybe that's a theme. Do I need to build an application? Maybe that's a theme to get from here to there. It could be any number of things based on your current situation. And then for every time period and for every theme, you can fill in the matrix of where those two things intersect to say, okay, well, if we need to build this application, we need to hire a developer, we need to get some infrastructure in place, we need to instantiate an iterative development path or X, Y, or Z thing. And it really allows you to say, okay, here's where we are, here's where we want to be, and here are the things that we need to do to get there across these different themes. And it's really just a one-page sort of logically structured approach to solving the problem of how do you get from here to there. And so when I got into the business world and I started rolling onto all these different client engagements to solve these problems, I didn't know where to start on all of these. So I would go back to the support structure at those consulting firms and I would say, hey, have you ever encountered this problem before? And a lot of times they would say yes. And next question is, okay, well, how did you solve it? And 9 times out of 10, they would show me a slide, or they would show me a Word document, or they'd show me an Excel workbook, or they'd show me something that was a structured way that they went about approaching that problem. And a lot of times it was a framework that they were using. They just they customized it. They made it fit for purpose and tailored to that client problem. But the overarching goal is the same. You're trying to get from here to there, right? I'll give you one more example before I'm quiet. It's called the prioritization framework, right? Other people call it the impact feasibility matrix, right? Again, it sounds very daunting if you say it like that. I just call it the prioritization framework. So if you've got a bunch of different things that you could potentially do, right, that you're trying to decide between, like which direction should we go? Should we go over here? Should we go over there? Should we go up there, down here? Well, you can plot those on a feasibility impact matrix. It's basically a 2x2. So think about it like an XY axis, like a graph. Okay. On the X axis, you have impact to the organization, right? Is it a low impact to the organization, or is it a high impact to the organization, assuming you can get it done? And then on the Y axis, you have the feasibility. So is it very highly feasible up here? Like we can do it fairly easily, or is there low feasibility because it's really hard to do, to change? It's like a really big thing. Okay. And so if you take these 7, 8, 9, 10 different directions that you go and you plot it on that map, you can say, well, this thing is going to be really highly impactful and it's really highly feasible. It's easy to do. So that would likely go up in this upper right-hand corner, right? As opposed to this other thing, which is, kind of down here, or this other thing that's over here. And after you have a conversation with a team and you plot those different things, you've effectively prioritized what you want to do based on logical parameters, right, of impact and feasibility. And so again, like the transformation map, like the impact feasibility matrix, or the from here to there framework and the prioritization framework, there are these frameworks that exist for all sorts of different problems that people encounter on a day-to-day basis in the business world. And if you can build up your personal inventory of those frameworks, then you can automatically have a way to logically structure an approach to a problem that helps you get over that imposter syndrome that you may be feeling internally.
That is brilliant. I love it because I love the specific frameworks that you shared. I think they're incredibly practical, and I'm sure everyone listening can benefit from them in some way. But I love the general concept of these frameworks as well for the reason that you described, because I think so often we get caught up in the newness and the emotion, the pressure, the fear, the need to be perfect or to prove ourselves in some way, that we can't access the logical part of our brain in those moments. Whereas
Sure.
we have frameworks that we've probably used throughout our lives to tackle problems. We're just not able to access them in that moment. And so to be able to go back with a more logical lens, like you're describing, to say, okay, when was the last time I encountered a problem that I didn't know where to start, right? What did I do then? What were the questions that I asked? And to even be able to put together your own versions of what you're describing based on the work that you do.
Absolutely. Yeah. And so I've sort of had this retrospective moment in my career looking back and doing that and saying, my gosh, if I hadn't had these frameworks, I don't feel as though I'd be as successful in my career because one, I'm able to differentiate myself from my peers. I'm coming to it, not I'm standing on the shoulders of giants is the phrase they say, right? I didn't come up with SWOT analysis. I didn't come up with an impact feasibility matrix. These brilliant business minds did in the past, right? But your ability to access those and then apply them to a specific problem and understanding which ones can apply where has helped with that differentiation, and it's helped with my clients because a lot of times all they're really looking for is a logical approach, right? If you're just pulling something out of a hat and saying, "Oh, I think we should go that direction," people are much less likely to get on board with something like that. Whereas if you walk them through this structure, right? People appreciate that structure and they appreciate the logic that goes into it, and how to facilitate through that. And there, if you can bring people along with you in that structure, then your buy-in is going to be much higher. Think about it. If you spend 2 hours in a workshop plotting those different things on the prioritization framework, at the end of it, you haven't prioritized anything. As a consultant, you've facilitated a discussion at the client where they've prioritized the things that they were struggling with. So you've helped them solve their problem, but they came to the end goal. And so when you say, okay, well, let's go do this, this is the highest priority thing, they're automatically bought in because they came up with it. You just facilitated the discussion. And so it really is a powerful tool or set of tools, right? That I think everybody should have in your toolkit. And it could be widely applicable, right? You don't just have to be a business student. You don't just have to be in consulting. You can use frameworks for anything. And I mean, people encounter problems every day in their daily lives, right? And I'm sure you've already got a framework that you use that I don't know, like I'm just talking about I signed up for a Tough Mudder. You know what that is? It's like an obstacle course
Oh
race.
yeah, in the
Yeah,
mud. Yeah.
yeah, in the mud. So it's in October. It's coming up in Dallas, and I've signed up for that one. And so I printed off this framework on the internet that I found, it's called like 100-day goal, right? And it's got different component pieces of it where you kind of identify what your goals are, and then you break them into 4 25-day chunks for the 100 days so that you're focusing on different things and you kind of keep it fresh. And then it has these check boxes for where you meet your goals or not. That's a framework.
Yeah.
That's a
Yeah.
framework. I didn't come up with it, but it's a logical way of structuring my approach to getting to this Tough Mudder and my personal goals with it. right? And so we use frameworks like that in our daily lives, even our own personal lives. And so I think if people can understand the value of something like that, it can really help them get over that internal monologue of negativity and saying like, I'm going to use this genius idea that somebody else came up with, right? But I'm
Mhm.
going to tailor it to my current situation. And that can help you get over your own, like I have to come with all the perfect answers, right? That
Yes.
kind of thing.
Exactly. And that feeling of uncertainty of I don't know how to do this, I don't know where to start, right? You can rely on the expertise of, like you said, that just being on the shoulders of giants,
Yeah,
and rely on
right.
the expertise of those who have come before you and feel confident that you're going down a proven path, right? And
Absolutely.
yeah,
Absolutely.
I love this so much, Tommy. This is incredibly helpful. I'm all about taking anxiety and transforming that into more productive energy. And I think this is just a really great way of doing that. You're tapping into problem solving skills that you don't even realize you have and you don't
Hmm.
even realize that you use all the time. So I just think this is an incredibly useful approach for so many.
Awesome.
And thank you so much for sharing your journey with us too. I really appreciate the opportunity to hear how you made those decisions and where the imposter syndrome inevitably creeps in.
Absolutely. And it never goes away. Let me tell you, I've been in consulting now for, like I said, a number of years, and I still go onto client sites where I don't know, I don't have all the answers, right? And I'm thinking, can I provide value, right? I do now have good experience and deep experience in a number of different areas, but I don't know everything about all topics. And sometimes you get pulled in to solve problems where you haven't encountered them before. And I really think helping approach those problems with these frameworks has really helped me kind of get over those internal challenges again. So hopefully your audience can use that moving forward and look for frameworks that could help them in their day-to-day challenges.
Absolutely. And for anybody who listening who wants to learn more about you and your consulting business and just kind of continue to follow your work, where can they find you?
Sure. So we have activeraconsulting.com. That would be for my company. For me personally, I'm on LinkedIn. It's linkedin.com/Tommy Ogden, right? So I'm fairly easy to find. And to be honest, for your listeners, I have curated a number of these different frameworks
Ooh.
into different themes. We have like traditional business frameworks. We have innovation frameworks. We have agile frameworks for like iterative development. And we're working on a number of others. And so if somebody reaches out, via LinkedIn or, it's T Ogden, TOGDEN at activeraconsulting.com. If you email me and sort of mention the show, I'd be happy to send over those frameworks. They would be in PowerPoint slides. And not only does it come with a blank template, right, that you can start using tomorrow on your client sites, but it also comes with an example of what a filled out template would look like for actual business problems that we've solved at our consulting firm. So I'd be happy to engage with your audience in a multitude of ways.
Oh, that is fantastic. Thank you so much. And I just wrote down your email address so I can put it into the show notes as well for anybody
Perfect.
who wants to check that out. And thank you again, Tommy. This has just been so helpful.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much, Kim, for having me. That's a very important topic, and I know one that everyone feels, even if they don't admit it. So it's good to get it out in the open.
Thanks so much for listening to the Impostor Syndrome Files. If you would like to continue this conversation in a safe and trusted space, I would love for you to join my virtual discussion group every Thursday at 12 p.m. Eastern. For the past several years, the group has been limited to women, but it is now open, regardless of gender, to anyone who is interested in exploring and troubleshooting common workplace challenges, building better awareness of ourselves and others, and becoming more inclusive allies at work. Check out the show notes for more info on how to find us, and please join us next week for another episode of the Impostor Syndrome Files.